Okay, so we are going to look at Psalm 4. The readings, the handful of months after Easter kind of focus on, okay, so this resurrection thing has happened. Now what? So what? How are we going to live this thing out? What are some ways that show we are kind of in this kingdom of the resurrection? So that theme kind of continues this week. Psalm 4 is what we're going to be looking at. Um, the psalm I think is kind of funny. It was one that, for whatever reason, many of the commentaries I read felt good or felt okay to disparage. This was a psalm that just, I'm not sure this is a favorite psalm of most people. This is not one that gets put on the posters or whatever. And one of my favorite quotes was, uh, "It's not the most elegant or coherent of psalms, but it has some things to give to us." And I'm like, oh, that's such a beautiful description of probably my spiritual life in our community, right? It's not the most elegant or coherent of spiritual lives and communities, but they mean well. So I have to admit, I felt a little drawn to this kind of scrappy little psalm. It is grammatically kind of jagged. It's not as pretty as some of them, but I will tell you why I think that is a little later on. But I do think it's the psalm for. Um, it talks about sleep. It talks about resting well. And so another comment that was really helpful for me in kind of looking at this was, this is a psalm for insomniacs, the anxious, and the overbusy. So if I'm the only person that applies to here, you are welcome to just sign off right now, and I will just read it myself a few more times. But I think those are kind of defaults in our culture. So I'm going to read Psalm 4. Again, this is from my pretty literal translation that I use sometimes with the Psalms, Robert Alters, because I think this psalm, depending what version you read it in, they may have actually smoothed out a lot of the kind of jagged English, or I guess the jagged Hebrew it would have been in here. But this one kind of reads in sentence fragments and it's a little hard to understand at times, and that's the way the original psalm is as well. So I'm going to read Psalm 4. This is for the lead player with stringed instruments. It's a David psalm. When I call out, answer me, my righteous God. In the straits, you set me free. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. Sons of man, how long will my glory be shamed? You love vain things and you seek out lies. Selah. But know that the Lord set apart his faithful. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Quake, but don't offend. Speak in your hearts on your beds and be still. Selah. Offer righteous sacrifices and trust in the Lord. Many say, who will show us good things? Lift up the light of your face to us, Lord. You put joy in my heart from the time their grain and their drink did abound. In peace, all whole, let me lie down and sleep. For you, Lord, alone, do set me down safely. So the way that this psalm is, I think, just the way it's written, there's almost no kind of complete sense. There's just almost none that just kind of complete thought. It jumps around. As I said, it's grammatically very jagged. You get little like fragments of sentences, like fragments of ideas that pile on top of each other. But the way the whole thing works is you kind of get this choppiness with an anchor word or two. And so I'll be pointing out, like, here's kind of the word or the phrase that all of this choppiness is working around. They're like the solid island in the midst of the stormy sea. So we'll keep looking for those as we go through. So the anchor words we're going to look at in this first section are both imperatives. They both have to do with actions, as most of these will. So in verses, I guess it's just verse 2, because one's kind of that introduction. We get the God answer me as one of them. And then we get the hear my prayers. So those are two phrases that tell us that we're in a psalm of petition. And again, one of the kind of distinctives that tells us we're in a petitioning psalm talking to God is kind of that audacity. Hey, you, God, answer me. Hey, hear my prayer. Interestingly enough, they're never asked like, oh, God, would you please listen to me? God, would you please do this? They're always very directive, which I think is interesting. in these Psalms. And so in these ones we hear, when I call out, answer me, my righteous God. In the straits, you set me free. Have mercy upon me. Hear my prayer. And it's a little hard to tell as we go on what exactly the prayer is, but this idea of hearing is going to come up a few times in the psalm, of God hearing the prayer, God being present in the midst of circumstances that can sometimes be a little hard to tell that God is present. So I think the kind of core of what this person is struggling with or trying to express in this kind of clunky psalm comes in 3 and 4. It says, sons of man, how long is my glory going to be shamed? You love vain things and you seek out lies. And so we're not told exactly what the problem is. If this is one of David's, it could have, there could have been many events in his life when people were slandering him, when people were literally threatening his life. If it's someone writing David or in the spirit of David, it seems like there's some slander. It seems like somebody is misinterpreting, I think, the motives. We're not totally sure. And I think that's one of the strengths of these Psalms, right? These aren't just Psalms that are, a poetic expression of the way the original author was feeling. This is the prayer book of God's people. These are actually meant to be prayed and sung by all of us. There are times when we feel like, how long is my glory going to be shamed? How long are those things I'm all about, those good things I've done, be misunderstood, be misinterpreted, right? Like, what some of the other songs say, like, hey, God, show up, do something about this. I'm sick of being treated this way. In this case, it seems to be misunderstood in those. And the phrase that really stuck to me in here, and the reason for this understanding seems to be, you people love vain things. It's that same word that gets used again and again in Ecclesiastes. It says, vain are the hopes, vain is this, empty. It's like a puff of air, a thing of mist that you can just blow away with your breath of fan. It's this thing that's here and then gone. Vain, empty, transitory, not there for very long. You love that thing and you seek out lies. And so one of the things that I think we need to consider when we feel ourselves in these positions in our culture is what are some of the values and what are some of the resources that are considered trusted? What are some of the things we are told are going to take care of us and are going to trust us in our culture? You can either think on those or just throw a few out there. What are some of the things we are supposed to trust in? What are some of the things that are supposed to take care of us in our culture? Money. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that classic line of, how you want to know what you love, look at your calendar and your bank account or your budget. See where you spend money and where you spend time, right? What else are we supposed to love and value in our culture?
Success.
Mm-hmm. Success, influence, power. Right, those are things valuable to people. Any other thoughts on those?
Stuff.
What's that?
Stuff.
Stuff. Yeah. Things. That's right. The culture of things, I've heard is called. You look at things.
Mm-hmm. In this room.
Okay, it's not just the culture that we live in and swim in though either. What are some of the values of your family of origin? What are some of the things you grew up with? Say, these are the things that are valuable. These are the things you should trust in or put your emphasis in life on. What are some of the things from your family of origin that were valuable, things that are supposed to be trusted, things, types of resources we need to have to be living a good life? And then I think the contrast to that question is, what are our default ones? Maybe we get that from culture. Maybe we get that from family of origin. Maybe we get that from rejecting those things. Say we've chosen another path. We've chosen other things. What are for you some of the default values, some of the default just resources that you think are important for people to be focusing on and you find your life focusing on?
I was going to say, in terms of my own family, education was important.
Mm-hmm.
That was an important value, and so it was just sort of understood that not whether or not you would go to college, it was just assumed that you would go. So education was thought to have been the way in which to be successful.
So I know we kind of process it at different speeds and think through those, but it's a question that's worth thinking about as well, because we will default to those things when we get too busy to reflect on them. And so I think the contrast that this psalm invites us into when saying human beings, we love empty things and we seek out lies, is again and again, this psalm is going to put us not in saying, hey, trust in the right resources. It's going to say trust in the person of God. And so trust is not just a head understanding. It's not just a knowing that God is out there and that we're supposed to do. Trusting has to do with, putting our weight in God in some ways and expecting that he will come through, of putting ourselves in a place that if God were to fail, it would actually cost us something. There is no backup plan in trust in a relationship. And so I think the question for us all is, as we live in a culture, as we have these stories, as we have these kind of personal value sets, and again, those are likely all things that are good, because most people don't trust and follow things that are just terrible and bad. There are people like that, but they're mostly good things, but they're not the best things. And they are things that will ultimately fail us if we try and make them a first thing, right? Because those things are ultimately not going to be enough. They are ultimately going to be empty. What does it look like to put those things in their proper place and instead trusting God, to lean into him enough that we actually, again, can fail or be harmed in some way if he were not to come through? There is no backup plan. We're not protecting ourselves, saying, well, God may or may not come through, right? And so as the psalm moves on, the conversation is going to kind of go back and forth between the psalmist wrestling with this idea of, are we trusting in empty things or are we trusting in God? And so in one of the kind of choppiest verses in the whole thing, we've got this quake, do not offend, speak in your hearts on your beds and be still. So the anchor point in that one is be still. And so if you look at this one originally, it's just these little kind of phrases. And I think it's trying to imitate the fact that when we are anxious, when our minds are going in other directions, when we think it's up to ourselves and our use of resources to take care of ourselves, the kind of running metaphor of the rest of the psalm is we're not going to be able to sleep. We're going to toss and turn and worry. We are going to feel like there's a million things running through our heads that we have to be doing. And so that's what I think this is. Quake or be angry is another one. Don't offend, speak your hearts in your beds. But then the anchor point again is just be still. Do not thrash about. Do not feel like we have to stay busy with our lives, be doing something constantly to do what is valuable, right? Just be still. It is a strong thing at the end of the phrase. And then we look at other people who maybe they're not trusting in their anxiety. Maybe they're not trusting in their planning. They offer righteous sacrifices and trust in the Lord. It's not ultimately about how we express our religious and spiritual lives. It's ultimately about trusting. That's what makes those sacrifices righteous. And in the next verse 7, we get a little bit of cynicism. Many are going to say, who's going to show us good things? Lift up the light of your face to us, Lord. So the challenge there is, okay, why are we anxious? Why do we toss and turn when we trust in those other things? Well, because we don't ultimately trust that God is going to show us the good things in life. We've still got this kind of hangover of the version of religion that treats God as an angry dad or a clerk, right? God doesn't actually want me to be happy. God expects me to do the right things, and he's keeping an eye on me. But a lot of my friends that don't worry about that stuff, they don't have to worry about it quite as much as I do. They get to have a little bit more fun than I do in the end, right? I don't think we believe that. And yet it haunts so many people in their approach to religion, both those that agree with it and those that don't want anything to do with it, right? We feel like God is ultimately out there to help us have no fun. And they say, who's going to show us the good things in life? Well, if God doesn't pull through, I got my backup plan. I got my own set of values. Maybe it's power, maybe it's money, maybe it's education, those things we talked about. Again, all good things. But if they are the thing we trust in and are expecting in because we don't think God is going to come through for the good life, we are going to find ourselves tossing and turning. We are going to find ourselves worried and feeling like, even if we don't agree in our heads, but in our heart of hearts, we think it's up to us. We are the ones who have to make sure that good things happen in our lives. And so I think that's the challenge that is brought to us. In what does our lives look like? Is it a level of anxiety? Is it a level of activity because we feel like it's ultimately on us or not? And I think this psalm does a good job of acknowledging where the source of ultimate joy comes from and the fact that that's not always expressed in the externals in life, right? In verse 8, we see, you put joy in my heart from the time of their grain and their drink did abound. So it's not saying, again, it's going back to those verses, people who loved vain things, sought out lies. How long are you going to be after me and shaming my glory? It's not promising God is going to plant this deepest joy in our hearts during times of comfort and ease. He can plant it just as easily in times when we look and see the people that we don't agree with, who don't seem to be, trusting the right way. And yet they often look like they're more successful, that people are more interested in what they have to say or think about, right? We're tempted to trust in those things they trust in: influence, power, education, social relationships, whatever, because they look more successful. Well, maybe they didn't quite trust in God, and yet they seem to have gotten the good life. Why can't I? Because we don't trust circumstances. We don't trust the appearances. We trust God. And the end of the psalm, I think, it's so simple, because we're worrying about the big things in life. We're worrying about where our heart ultimately trusts. And it just gives us this really simple nod of, maybe here's one way to tell where is your heart? Where is it actually aimed? And he says, in peace, all whole, let me lie down and sleep. For you, Lord, alone, do set me down safely. We don't live in a time and a place, in a culture where most of us have to be afraid at night. We don't have to set guards over ourselves. We can lay down, we can sleep without fear of attack. That's what this author actually did not have the ability to do. They had to trust God when they went to sleep, that they would wake up in the morning. We're really blessed. We're not in that situation. And yet, how many of our nights as we lay down, running through our head, are the things we need to do, the things we didn't do, the things we did wrong, the things that are waiting for us, the blah, 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 right? Why do we do that? Is it because we're just responsible? Or is it because lurking beneath all of that, we are trying to prove we're valuable? We're trying to make sure we have enough of whatever resources we value. Because ultimately there's a chink, there's a crack in the trust we have in God. We can't just lay down, be satisfied with our day, good and bad, be ready for whatever comes tomorrow. You put joy in my heart. In peace, all whole, let me lie down and sleep. Not I do lie down and sleep, let me. And I think that's probably where most of us are. This is not a sheer effort of will. I lay down and I'm like, okay, I will not be stressed. I trust God. Try really hard, right? In peace, all whole. Let me lie down and sleep. I'm not good at it. I need you to teach this stormy, anxious heart. Let me lie down and sleep. For you, Lord, alone, do set me down safely. Simple thing as a good night's rest, as a sense of peace, is meant to be ours. A sense that we don't have to be frantically busy, a sense that we don't have to take care of ourselves ultimately. And so, yeah, it's a clunky psalm. It's jagged. It's a little hard to tell what they're getting at all the time, but I was kind of like, this is the way I feel so many days. I feel a little all over the place. One of the first times I read this week, I'm like, oh man, this is like me in the morning trying to pray, like, oh Jesus, would you please be over here and squirrel? And then and I'm going to do this, and I'm worried about it. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 15 minutes. Did I even say anything to God, right? This psalm feels like that to me. They're struggling, they're fighting their way back. And at the end, I love how it ends. It just says, let me, help me, hear me, let me lie down in peace. I'm going to get so many of these things wrong. There's going to be so much anxiety and fear there. Let me trust. I need help with even that. Because only in you, Lord, you alone are going to set me down in safety. That goodness, that wholeness that we all desire so strongly, it's not going to be found anywhere else, even though we look elsewhere so much. So I would invite us all to, examine the way we lay down this week. Not to try harder, but just to say those words. God, let me trust. I'm supposedly living in Easter and in resurrection, a new kind of life that I couldn't enjoy without you. Let me at the end of the day trust you, not my plans, not those resources, not my values. You'll be enough. You are going to take care of me. Any thoughts, questions?